Julie Andrews spent 60 years giving the world exactly what it needed from her. And in doing so, she kept almost everything about herself hidden from plain sight. The voice that stunned a London audience at 12, won Broadway at 20, and carried two of the most beloved films in the history of cinema, was taken from her in a single afternoon in 1997 by a surgery that was supposed to save it. She never sang again. And behind those 60 years of performing sat a collection of losses that never made it into any headline. A father who turned out not to be her father. A marriage that professional success quietly destroyed. A Hollywood career that nearly collapsed twice before she rebuilt it from the ground up. And a voice that medicine took and could not give back. She kept smiling through all of it. The world saw the smile. This is everything the smile was covering. She was born Julia Elizabeth Wells on October 1st, 1935, in Walton-on-Thames, England, to a mother who had trained as a pianist and a father who taught school. The marriage between Barbara Ward Morris and Edward Charles Wells didn't survive the war, and by 1943, Barbara had remarried a Canadian-born vaudeville performer named Ted Andrews, who gave young Julie both a new surname and a new world entirely. Ted and Barbara spent the war years touring England and entertaining soldiers, and Julie traveled alongside them, absorbing performance through constant exposure before instruction ever formally arrived. At 8 years old, she began studying under Madame Lillian Stiles Allen, a concert soprano in Leeds who believed, without hesitation, that Julie was one of the rarest voices she would ever encounter. Stiles. Allen focused on perfect diction and emotional truth in every phrase, and she drilled into her students a sentence that Julie carried for the rest of her performing life. The amateur works until he can get it right, but the professional works until he cannot go wrong. Julie took it seriously enough to travel alone from London to Leeds for every lesson, sleeping in a freezing room lit by gas lamps, spending evenings drinking ginger beer with her teacher and listening to stories about the greatest opera singers who had ever performed. Those years shaped not just her voice, but her understanding of what discipline actually meant, and she never lost either one. What Ted Andrews noticed first was the range, which was extraordinary for a child, and the pitch, which was perfect. What audiences at the London Hippodrome noticed on October 22, 1947, when a 12-year-old walked out and performed a demanding aria from the opera Mignon, was something that had no technical name. The crowd stood. Britain's theater press called her the country's youngest prima donna, and 16 months later she stood on the stage of the London Palladium for the Royal Command Variety performance before King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. No solo performer that young had ever appeared at the event. She was 13. Between performances, she was also gaining ground in radio and television, becoming a regular on BBC programs like Up the Pole and Educating Archie, developing comedic timing alongside experienced performers, and demonstrating early that her abilities reached further than any single category could hold. That's when the secret arrived. At 14, she discovered that Edward Wells was not her biological father. Her mother had been involved with a family friend, and he was the man she actually came from. The news hit hard, but Julie absorbed it quietly and remained close to Edward Wells for the rest of his life. It was the first thing she would carry in silence. It would not be the last. Broadway came calling when she was 19. On September 30th, 1954, she opened at the Royale Theatre in The Boyfriend, playing Polly Brown with a precision and ease that critics found difficult to dismiss, and she won the Theatre World Award for Outstanding Broadway Debut the following year. The producers of My Fair Lady were watching. The role of Eliza Doolittle had originally been offered to Mary Martin, a more established name, but Martin turned it down, and that decision reshaped both their careers entirely. Andrews opened as Eliza on March 15, 1956, and what followed was 2,717 performances, a Tony nomination for Best Actress in a Musical, and songs like I Could Have Danced All Night embedded permanently into the catalog of American musical theater. 3 years later, she starred in Camelot on Broadway, playing Queen Guinevere opposite Richard Burton, earned another Tony nomination, and became part of one of the most culturally significant musicals in American memory, when Jacqueline Kennedy, after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, compared his presidency to the brief shining moment of King Arthur's court. Hollywood watched all of it, and then made the decision that still baffles people when they hear it. When the film version of My Fair Lady went into production, the studio cast Audrey Hepburn instead of Andrews, and Hepburn's singing was dubbed by another performer. Andrews, who had proven she could carry every note without assistance, was passed over for the film version of her own defining role. She didn't argue. She took a different film. Walt Disney had been searching for the actress who could carry Mary Poppins, and what he needed was a voice that could stop a room, a warmth that made the impossible feel real, and a presence that commanded without visible effort. Andrews fit all of it. Mary Poppins premiered on August 27, 1964, earned $31 million at the box office, and became the kind of film that 3 generations of families have watched together without it ever growing old. On March 31, 1957, she had already touched a television audience that few performers ever reached, when over 107 million people tuned in to watch her perform in the live CBS broadcast of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, written specifically for television. At the 37th Academy Awards in 1965, she won the Oscar for Best Actress in a Motion Picture. The woman she beat that night was Audrey Hepburn. The Sound of Music opened in March of 1965, and didn't just succeed. It earned $286 million worldwide, won 5 Academy Awards including Best Picture, and became one of the highest-grossing films ever made. Andrews played Maria von Trapp, a young woman stepping from a convent into the role of governess for a large Austrian family, and she played her with a conviction that made the story feel honest even at its most theatrical. The famous opening scene on a mountaintop was filmed with a helicopter circling overhead, and the rotor wash knocked her flat into the grass between every take. She laughed about it later, which was her way of handling the things that physically knocked her down. 2 consecutive roles as beloved nannies had given Hollywood a fixed picture of her, and she spent the following years working against it. In 1968, Star, a biographical film about stage actress Gertrude Lawrence, cost $14 million to make and returned almost nothing, with critics calling her performance overdone. Darling Lily followed in 1970, directed by Blake Edwards with a budget that ballooned to $25 million, while the film failed to find an audience. She had sworn on screen for the first time in that film, and performed a striptease in another scene. 2 deliberate choices meant to prove she could step outside the image audiences had fixed around her. Neither was enough to shift the picture. Television offered a temporary landing place. The Julie Andrews Hour launched on ABC on September 13, 1972, and critics praised it for her charm, her range, and her ability to move between musical numbers and comedy without losing momentum. The ratings, competing against strong Wednesday night programming, never matched the reviews, and ABC canceled the show after 24 episodes in April of 1973. 1 month later, it won 7 out of 10 Emmy nominations, including Outstanding Variety Musical Series. Honored everywhere it looked, already canceled. Nightclub performances followed, where jazz standards and jokes about her own Hollywood past let audiences find a version of her they hadn't been permitted to see. And critics responded by praising the range she had always carried, but been rarely allowed to show publicly. The reinvention came in stages. In 1979, she appeared in 10, a romantic comedy directed by Blake Edwards that earned more than $74 million in the United States. In 1981, she appeared topless in S.O.B., which Edwards also directed, and the choice was a deliberate public statement to both audiences and studios that she was no longer available to be managed by their fixed ideas about who she was. Then came Victor Victoria in 1982, She played Victoria Grant, a struggling soprano in Paris who poses as a man performing as a female impersonator, and the role required her to carry complexity and risk that nothing she had previously done could have prepared audiences to expect. The film earned $28 million domestically, brought her a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Comedy or Musical, and delivered an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. 7 Oscar nominations total. After that, critics finally stopped reaching back to the nannies. Her personal life had its own arc running beneath the professional noise the entire time. She married set and costume designer Tony Walton in 1959, had a daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton, in 1962, and Walton even designed costumes for Mary Poppins during the years of their marriage. But the travel and the constant distance that a career at that scale demands wore the marriage down, and they divorced in 1967. Andrews turned to therapy afterward, on the recommendation of director Mike Nichols, and later described how it helped her clear what she called the clutter and garbage in her mind. She met Blake Edwards outside a therapist's office, an encounter he called a wonderfully Hollywood moment. They married in 1969, adopted 2 daughters from Vietnam in the mid-70s, Amy and Joanna, and made 7 films together. The marriage lasted 41 years, until Edwards died in 2010. She described it as a true love story, and nothing in those 41 years gave reason to think otherwise. By 1995, while performing the Broadway adaptation of Victor Victoria, her voice had begun to strain in ways that rest alone couldn't fix. Doctors found a lesion on her vocal cords, and in June of 1997, she underwent surgery at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York to have it removed. The procedure was described as routine. The result was permanent scarring that stopped her vocal cords from vibrating properly and eliminated the 4-octave soprano that Styles Allen had once called once in a lifetime. Even speaking became difficult afterward. In December of 1999, she filed a malpractice lawsuit against Mount Sinai Hospital and the 2 surgeons involved, arguing she had never been properly informed of the real risks. The case settled privately in September of 2000 for an amount never disclosed. No settlement addressed what had actually been lost. Starting in 2000, she underwent 4 additional surgeries with Dr. Stephen Zeitels at Massachusetts General Hospital, which helped her speaking voice recover somewhat. Her singing voice never came back. She directed funding toward vocal restoration research alongside scientists at MIT and Harvard Medical School, working on laser technology and tissue engineering, hoping the work would reach someone even if it arrived too late for her. She didn't disappear. In 2001, she returned to Disney after 37 years with The Princess Diaries, playing Queen Clarice Rinaldi opposite Anne Hathaway in a film that earned $165 million worldwide and introduced her to audiences who had grown up after The Sound of Music. She voiced Queen Lillian in Shrek 2 in 2004 and reprised the role in Shrek the Third and Shrek Forever After. In 2007, she narrated Enchanted, which earned over $340 million worldwide. In 2016, she directed a staging of My Fair Lady for the musical's 60th anniversary, premiering at the Sydney Opera House with sets and costumes recreated from archived original designs, and the production broke box office records across every city it reached. In 2017, she co-created Julie's Green Room for Netflix alongside her daughter Emma, a children's educational series about the performing arts that earned 2 Daytime Emmy nominations. What she returns to in every interview and in the books she has written with Emma is the voice. Not with bitterness, but with the particular sadness of someone who knows exactly what was taken and has made peace with the fact that it will not come back. She has called it one of the greatest heartbreaks of her life, and she says it plainly, without softening the edges. That is the only way she has ever spoken about the things that cost her something real. Julie Andrews spent 60 years being everything the world needed her to be, and she carried the weight of that alone. Now you know what was underneath it.